Picture this: Paris, 1778. A 72-year-old man in a fur cap shuffles into the glittering court of Versailles and absolutely owns the room. Women are lining up to kiss him. French aristocrats are losing their minds over him. He is simultaneously running a covert intelligence network, writing flirtatious love letters in French to a married woman 40 years his junior, and securing the military alliance that will birth an entire nation. His name is Benjamin Franklin, and his chart is everything, because here is what gets me. This man was born the 15th child of a candle maker in Puritan Boston with no money, no connections, and a formal education that ended when he was 10 years old. 10. He ran away from home at 17 as a literal fugitive. And he died at 84 as the most famous American on the planet, with 20,000 people at his funeral and the French National Assembly entering 3 days of official mourning for him. Not an American institution. France cried for 3 days for a former candlemaker's kid from Boston. And when you look at his chart, you stop asking, how did he do that? And you start saying, of course he did that. Because the Capricorn Sun at 27 degrees, that is literally the blueprint for building an empire from nothing over a lifetime. The Pisces Moon, that is exactly how a man charms an entire foreign court into funding a revolution just by existing in a room. And the Mercury in Aquarius. We will get to that, because that placement explains every invention, every library, every fire department, every lightning rod, every single institution that still runs this country. But we will also get to the part about his sun, the part that shows you what happens when a Capricorn shadow side takes over, because it is not pretty. And it is, I promise you, written all over his chart. Before we get into this, if you are obsessed with understanding historical figures through astrology, hit subscribe and drop a like on this video. And I need to know your take on this. Do you think Benjamin Franklin's Capricorn ambition made him genuinely one of the greatest humans who ever lived? Or do you think his chart just made him really good at making himself look that way? Because there is a case for both. Comment below, because this one has me split. So who is Benjamin Franklin, astrologically speaking? Sun in Capricorn. And not just any Capricorn degree either. 27 degrees. Capricorn puts him right at the late degrees of that sign, where Capricorn energy is at its most evolved, most seasoned, most... I have been on this mountain my entire life, and I know every single rock on this path. Capricorn is the sea goat, technically, half mountain climber, half fish, which is actually a perfect metaphor for Franklin. He had the Capricorn relentless climb toward the top and the emotional depth underneath that most people never saw coming. Saturn rules Capricorn, and Saturn is the planet of time, structure, delayed gratification, and legacy. Saturn does not let you have things fast. Saturn makes you earn it. It makes you wait. And then, when you finally get there, after all that waiting and climbing and disciplined work, what you have built is so solid it lasts forever. That is Benjamin Franklin's entire life summarized in one sentence. The man spent his 20s building a printing business, his 30s and 40s accumulating wealth and influence, his 50s doing science experiments, and then, at an age when most people in the 1700s were already dead, he became a diplomat, a revolutionary statesman, and a celebrity of international proportions. That is Saturn in action. That is Capricorn doing exactly what Capricorn does. Now, we do not have his birth time, so no rising sign for today, but honestly, his sun and moon alone are doing more than enough work. The moon in Pisces is the piece that makes everything else make sense, because on paper, a Capricorn sun and a Pisces moon should not go together. Capricorn is earth, practical, methodical, structured. Pisces is water, fluid, emotional, intuitive, boundlessly empathetic. But when you put them together, you get someone who can build the most grounded, practical systems in the world, while also reading every single person in the room and giving them exactly what they need to feel seen. You get someone who is calculating and warm at the same time, someone who can negotiate a military treaty in the morning and write a flirtatious love poem in French that afternoon without it feeling like a contradiction. Because for Franklin, it was not a contradiction. It was Tuesday. And then Mercury in Aquarius. Mercury governs how you think and communicate. Aquarius is the revolutionary, the community builder, the visionary who thinks 50 years ahead of everyone else. Mercury in Aquarius is the placement of someone who looks at the world and thinks, this is inefficient and I am going to fix it, not for personal gain, for everybody. Remember this Mercury placement because it shows up everywhere in Franklin's life in ways that will make you put your phone down. So keep those three things in mind: Capricorn Sun, Pisces Moon, Mercury in Aquarius. As we go back to Boston, 1706, and watch this chart come alive from day one. January 17th, 1706, Boston, Massachusetts Bay Colony. It is freezing and Puritan and deeply not the place where you would expect the future godfather of the Enlightenment to show up. Josiah Franklin, candle maker and soap boiler, welcomes his 15th child. His 15th? Benjamin Franklin was the youngest son of the youngest son, as he dryly noted in his autobiography, for 5 generations back. He was born into the bottom of the social ladder by every standard of the time. No inherited wealth, no family name, no connections, just a crowded house, a hardworking father, and evidently a Capricorn son that had absolutely no intention of staying at the bottom. His formal schooling ended at age 10 years old, and the education is already over because the family could not afford it. Josiah Franklin had wanted his son for the clergy, but that required years of schooling he simply could not pay for. So instead, little Ben went to work for his father, making candles and soap. And here is where you can already see the Capricorn work ethic doing its thing. Because rather than just resign himself to the candle shop, Franklin devoured books. Every book he could get his hands on. He taught himself to write by copying essays from a publication called The Spectator, rewriting the pieces from memory, and then comparing them to the originals to see where he fell short. Teaching himself. At 10 years old, disciplined, methodical self-improvement. That is textbook Capricorn, and also deeply, a little exhausting to read about as a fellow human being. At 12, he was apprenticed to his older brother James's printing shop. And here's the first time we see the Pisces Moon doing its thing, because rather than be the quiet apprentice, Franklin started writing anonymously. He created a fake character, a middle-aged widow named Silence Dogood, and slipped letters under the print shop door at night. Those letters got published. People loved them. They talked about them all over Boston. And James had absolutely no idea his teenage little brother had written them. When he found out, he was livid. James started administering beatings, made Franklin's life miserable. The Pisces Moon picked up on every person's emotional state, and the Capricorn Sun filed that information away for later use. Also, and I love this detail, the pseudonym he chose was Silence Dogood. An enemy to vice and a friend of virtue at 15. The audacity of this Capricorn baby. The situation with James only got worse until, at 17, Franklin did something that shows you exactly how the Capricorn and Pisces work together in this chart. He ran away, just left. In colonial New England, breaking your apprenticeship made you a fugitive. He did not care. The Capricorn knew the situation had no ceiling. The Pisces Moon, having absorbed the emotional reality that his brother would never let him grow, processed it and made a decision. He arrived in Philadelphia carrying one shirt and a few coins, walking up Market Street with a bread roll under each arm, munching on a third, and passed the door of Deborah Red, the woman he would eventually share his life with, who later said he looked like the most ridiculous person she had ever seen. He was 17, broke, technically a criminal, and he was already exactly where the chart said he was supposed to be. And this early childhood pattern with James, the older authority figure who underestimates him, the situation where Franklin is subordinate to someone who cannot see his potential. Remember this, because it shows up again in the most painful, most Capricorn way imaginable, with his own son. But first, the rise, and what a rise it was. At 23, Franklin opened his own printing shop in Philadelphia. The Capricorn climb had officially begun. Within a year, he had taken over a failing newspaper and turned it into the Pennsylvania Gazette, the leading paper in the colonies. Sharp, witty, full of Franklin's own voice, which, remember, Mercury in Aquarius. There was always something revolutionary about the way he communicated. He was not just reporting news, he was shaping public opinion, building a platform. Every Capricorn move he made had a Saturn-approved long game attached to it. Then 1732. He is 26, almost 27, and he launches Poor Richard's Almanac. Saturn-ruled timing, by the way. This was classic Capricorn, the disciplined patience to build the infrastructure first, establish the credibility, and then deploy a product that would run for 26 consecutive years and make him one of the wealthiest men in the colonies. Poor Richards was full of those aphorisms you still hear quoted today. Early to bed and early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. An investment in knowledge pays the best interest. These were not just catchy sayings. They were the Capricorn philosophy made bite-sized and handed to an entire society. He was essentially giving everyone his personal life manual. Mercury in Aquarius, doing community service via almanac. But here is what was happening on the other side of the ledger at this same time, because Franklin was also managing his private life in very Capricorn ways. He had an illegitimate son named William, born around 1730 to a woman whose identity was never recorded. Franklin acknowledged the boy publicly, brought him into his household, and raised him alongside his other children. His common-law wife, Deborah, accepted it. On one level, this is a man taking responsibility for his child, which is very Saturn-approved, very Capricorn, duty over comfort. On another level, the mother's identity being simply erased from history is a reminder that even the most enlightened Capricorns of the 18th century were still operating in the 18th century. By his early 40s, Franklin was wealthy enough to retire from active business, but a Capricorn does not retire. A Capricorn just pivots to the next mountain. And for Franklin, that mountain was electricity. In the 1740s and early 1750s, he became obsessed with electrical experiments. He was not the first person to work with electricity, but he was the Mercury in Aquarius who figured out that lightning and electricity were the same thing. And then immediately thought, okay, but how do we use this to save lives? That is the full Aquarius gift, not just curiosity, application. The lightning rod, one of the most consequential inventions in human history, protecting buildings from fire across the world, came directly from Franklin asking, how do we use this practically? Capricorn practicality, Aquarius innovation, the combination that was quietly changing the physical landscape of every civilization it touched. The kite experiment happened in June 1752. Franklin, a storm, a key on a string, and a thundercloud. And the moment electricity traveled down that wet string and into the key, something sparked in the world's understanding of nature itself. The Royal Society of London gave him an honorary degree. Kings and philosophers wrote to him. He went from being a successful colonial printer to an internationally recognized scientific mind in what felt, from the outside, like an instant. But of course we know it was not an instant. It was decades of Capricorn groundwork being laid before the moment of recognition arrived. Saturn makes you wait, and then Saturn makes sure the whole world watches. Now keep that lightning rod moment in mind, because the way Franklin responded to international fame, what he chose to do next, and how his chart guided that decision tells you everything about how a late-degree Capricorn Sun processes success. He did not coast. He did not celebrate. He kept building. And what he built before the revolution even started is genuinely insane. The first lending library in America, his idea, 1731. The first volunteer fire department in Philadelphia, his idea. The first public hospital in the colonies, his idea. The University of Pennsylvania, his vision, street lighting and paving for Philadelphia. He organized it. Insurance for homeowners, he helped establish it. The American Philosophical Society. He founded it, the post office system that would eventually become the U.S. Postal Service. He ran it and completely reorganized it. This is the Mercury in Aquarius placement in its most evolved, most fully realized form. This is someone who looked at society and thought, every single one of these problems has a solution, and I will personally build the infrastructure to solve them. Not for profit, for the public good. Because an Aquarius Mercury does not think about what they personally need, it thinks about what the collective needs. And here's the thing that I find kind of incredible about this. Every institution I just listed still exists. The library, the university, the hospital, the postal system. Franklin built things meant to outlast him by centuries, and they have. That is the Capricorn legacy, obsession made manifest. Saturn rules time. and Franklin's relationship with time was always about planting trees whose shade he might never sit under. He was building for a future he might not live to see. This pattern, building for legacy rather than for immediate reward, is about to become very, very relevant. Now we need to talk about what happened with Britain and with France, and with the most sophisticated diplomatic manipulation any Pisces moon has ever pulled off. By the 1750s and 1760s, Franklin was spending enormous amounts of time in London as a colonial agent, representing Pennsylvania's interests before the British Parliament. He tried for years to find a peaceful resolution to the tensions between the colonies and the Crown. Genuinely tried. The Capricorn in him wanted structural solutions, constitutional arrangements, orderly resolutions. The Pisces moon in him could feel the emotional temperature shifting in both countries and was constantly adjusting, reading rooms, sensing what people needed to hear. He spent 17 years going back and forth, negotiating, petitioning, warning both sides that they were headed for disaster. Nobody listened. Britain passed the Stamp Act. Franklin fought it and eventually got it repealed. That was a genuine triumph, and the colonies celebrated him as a hero, but then came more taxes, more tensions, the Boston Massacre, the Tea Act, and finally in 1774, something that shattered any remaining faith Franklin had in British goodwill. His private letters, written years earlier warning colonial leaders about certain British officials, were obtained by opponents and used to humiliate him publicly before the Privy Council. He stood in the cockpit, a famous chamber in London, and was berated by the Solicitor General for over an hour in front of a crowd that laughed and jeered. He stood completely still, said nothing, and left. A week later, he was dismissed from his position as Deputy Postmaster General. He returned to Philadelphia 2 months later in May of 1775 as a man who had made his decision. The Capricorn does not break in the moment of humiliation. The Capricorn files it and waits. He arrived in Philadelphia to find the revolution had already begun at Lexington and Concord. He joined the Continental Congress immediately. Within months, he was on the Committee of Five, drafting the Declaration of Independence alongside Thomas Jefferson. He was 70 years old. He was fighting gout so badly that Jefferson had to carry the work to him, and he still made edits, small but important ones. And considering he was arguably the best writer in the room, we should assume those edits mattered. In October 1776, he was sent to France, ambassador diplomat. The colony's one shot at securing French military and financial support. And this, right here, is where the Pisces moon earns its place in this chart forever. Because what happened in France is not a diplomatic story, it is an emotional intelligence story. Franklin arrived in Paris in December 1776. He was 70. He had crossed the Atlantic in winter during wartime, and he showed up wearing a simple gray coat and a fur hat and proceeded to become the most famous person in France. Not because of his accomplishments, because of how he made people feel. He understood that the French court had a very specific fantasy about what an American was. They wanted the noble, savage philosopher, the man of simple virtues and great wisdom from the wild new world. So Franklin gave it to them. He wore the fur hat everywhere, to salons, to Versailles, to audiences with the king. He did not dress up. He dressed down, deliberately, strategically, and the Parisian elite absolutely lost their minds over it. Women surrounded him at receptions. They put laurel wreaths on his head. His face was on medallions sold across the city. Thomas Jefferson, watching all of this, wrote later that Franklin had an absolutely uncontrollable draw to women, losing all power over himself in their company, which is very Pisces moon behavior. The boundless charm, the emotional attunement, the way he seemed to genuinely see every single person and reflect back what they needed to feel. And Franklin being Franklin, he weaponized it completely, not in a manipulative, cynical way. This is actually the Pisces moon at its most sophisticated, but in a way where the charm and the diplomacy were genuinely the same thing. His social relationships were his diplomatic relationships. His most important French contacts were women who moved through the power structures he needed access to. Madame Briand de Jouy was the first great French connection. 33 years old, a celebrated harpsichordist, married but deeply unhappy, and completely captivated by Franklin. They wrote over 150 letters to each other over 8 years. He called her his dear friend. She called him Mon cher papa. He wrote her a mock treaty of peace, a friendship document formatted like a diplomatic agreement, in which Article 1 declared there shall be eternal peace, friendship, and love between them. There is also the famous scene of Franklin playing chess for hours with a neighbor while Madame Brillant sat in her bathtub covered with a board, watching. 18th century France was something else. The point is, Franklin was in his 70s running a covert diplomatic mission, actively cultivating the most useful social network in Paris, and doing it all while writing love letters in French. The Pisces moon does not age, it just gets more refined. And then Madame Helvetius, a widow in her 60s, brilliant, eccentric, ran a salon that was essentially a bohemian commune with philosophers and dogs and ducks living on her property. Franklin met her and was, by multiple accounts, immediately besotted. He proposed. She turned him down, saying she was honoring the memory of her late husband. He wrote her a letter. This is real, documented, claiming that he had gone to heaven in a dream and found that both his late wife, Deborah, and her late husband, Claude, had married each other. So, he informed Madame Helvetius, they should avenge ourselves. She still said no, and they remained close friends for the rest of his life. This is Pisces moon behavior at its most characteristically itself. The romance is always somewhat fluid. The feelings are genuine and enormous, and also somehow survivable when not reciprocated. The emotional world is wide and accommodating and never quite runs out. Meanwhile, behind all of this social activity, Franklin was conducting one of the most consequential diplomatic campaigns in Western history. He was feeding intelligence to the Americans, building relationships with French Foreign Minister Vergennes, managing press coverage across multiple countries, and ultimately, in 1778, securing the Treaty of Alliance with France. The agreement that brought French money and military power into the American Revolution and effectively guaranteed its success. Without that treaty, historians broadly agree, the revolution likely fails. Benjamin Franklin, in his fur hat, writing flirtatious letters and playing chess beside a bathtub saved the American Republic. The Capricorn built the structure. The Pisces moon charmed the people who held the keys. He stayed in France for 9 years. 9 years. He was there in a way that almost defies description. When he finally left in 1785, crowds lined the roads to see him go. He was carried in a special litter provided by the French royal family because his gout had gotten too bad for a carriage. That is how you leave a country. He came home to a hero's welcome and immediately resumed public service because of course he did. He was elected president of Pennsylvania, essentially governor, and then served 3 full terms. At 81, he was the oldest delegate at the Constitutional Convention. The document that emerged from that convention, the U.S. Constitution, bears his influence in its structure. The Senate-House bicameral compromise? Franklin suggested it when the convention was deadlocked. The man was 81 and still solving the problems everyone else had given up on. And then, in the final years of his life, the Pisces moon did something that takes real courage to do. Franklin evolved. He had owned enslaved people earlier in his life, at least 7 people, by the records we have, and had even run sale advertisements in his newspaper. But in his late years, the Pisces moon's deep well of empathy expanded in a direction that many of his contemporaries never allowed their own empathy to go. He became an abolitionist, a genuine one. He took over the presidency of the Pennsylvania Society for promoting the abolition of slavery in 1787. He circulated anti-slavery materials, and in February 1790, just 2 months before his death, he submitted a petition to the United States Congress, urging the abolition of slavery. It was ignored. He kept fighting until he physically could not. That evolution, from someone who participated in a system to someone who spent his final energy fighting against it. That is the Pisces moon in its most profound expression. The capacity to keep expanding emotionally, to keep letting your empathy reach further, even in your 80s. It is not redemption as an easy story. It is a man reckoning, slowly and then all at once, with the full moral weight of what he had been part of and doing something about it. But I promised you the shadow, the Capricorn shadow. And I tell you about William Franklin, Benjamin's illegitimate son was in many ways his father's greatest project. Benjamin had raised him, educated him, taken him everywhere, treated him as his closest companion for decades. William helped with the electrical experiments. He traveled to London with his father. He was appointed royal governor of New Jersey through Benjamin's connections and influence, a prestigious, important role. Father and son were a team. And then the revolution happened, and William Franklin chose the crown. He was a loyalist. He believed, not unreasonably, in the British constitutional order his father had once also defended. He stayed at his post as governor even as the revolution built around him. He was eventually arrested by colonial forces, spent 2 years as a prisoner of war, and was later exiled to England. He became a leader of loyalist organizations abroad. Benjamin Franklin never forgave him. He all but cut William out of his will entirely, writing that the part William had acted against me in the late war would account for my leaving him. No more of an estate he endeavored to deprive me of. They met once more, in England, nearly a decade after their estrangement. It did not repair anything. Benjamin Franklin, who had charmed the French court, who had negotiated a peace treaty, who had built consensus in a fractious Continental Congress, could not forgive his own son. And here is the Capricorn shadow in its purest form. For all of the sea goat's evolution, for all of its emotional depth, there is a coldness that lives underneath the structure. When a Capricorn decides someone has betrayed the mission, the life's work, the legacy, the thing they sacrificed everything to build, the warmth, can simply switch off. Franklin wrote to William that nothing had ever hurt me with such keen sensations as being deserted in my old age by my only son. And then he cut him off anyway. The pain was real. The severance was permanent. Saturn does not forgive debts easily. The man who had built institutions for the benefit of all humanity, who had empathized his way into the hearts of an entire foreign nation, who had evolved his moral understanding over 8 decades, could not bend his Capricorn will enough to let go of the betrayal in his own household. The goat who climbs every mountain sometimes cannot navigate the terrain right at his feet. Benjamin Franklin died on April 17, 1790, at 84 years old. A lung abscess. His physician described the final hours as peaceful, a calm, lethargic state. And then he was simply gone. 20,000 people came to his funeral. The French National Assembly mourned for 3 days. The U.S. House of Representatives went into a month of official mourning. In his will, he left money to Boston and Philadelphia, with a caveat. It was to sit in trust for 100 years and then be used for scholarships and public works. His last act was, of course, building something designed to outlast everyone in the room. That epitaph he wrote for himself at 22, when he was still just a Boston printer's kid trying to make it in Philadelphia, says, "The body of B. Franklin Printer, like the cover of an old book, its contents torn out and stripped of its lettering and gilding, lies here food for worms. But the work shall not be lost, for it will appear once more in a new and more elegant edition." He was 22. And he already knew that legacy was the whole point. That is a 27-degree Capricorn Sun, fully aware of Saturn's rules, making peace with time itself. Aquarius Mercury built the institutions. Pisces Moon charmed the nations. And the Capricorn Sun, patient, methodical, climbing with absolute certainty, outlasted everyone who had ever underestimated the candlemaker's kid. We still live in the world Benjamin Franklin built. The postal system, the lending library, the university, the fire department, the lightning rod. The concept that a poor kid with a brilliant mind and the discipline to develop it can climb to the top of every mountain this civilization has to offer. That is his chart. That is his legacy. That is what 84 years of a Capricorn Sun, Pisces Moon, Aquarius Mercury looks like when it runs at full power. And honestly, looking at this man's chart and this man's life, I would not change a single placement.